Hello everyone, this is my last On My Mind video blog for 2017. I thought it's a good time to talk a little bit about what happened this year. It's been an exciting year, a lot has happened. 2017 has been a year of a lot of changes, and I think 2018 is going to be quite exciting as well. We started off the year, of course, quite pessimistic. We had low oil prices. There was a lot of malaise in the air. People thought LNG is going to be oversupplied for many, many years. They thought the market was getting soft. They thought the prices are going to stay low. They thought that there's going to be a buyer's market for a long time. But I think that we are definitely ending the year on a different note. We are now looking at a situation where oil prices have come up significantly, probably 30% since the beginning of the year. Gas price in the US is staying very low, which is of course good. Asian spot LNG prices have risen quite a bit. And most importantly, of course, is that the demand forecasts have been quite pathetic and wrong, as they often are. The biggest upside has been, of course, China. In the Asia Pacific market, China has exceeded everybody's expectations, except maybe some of the people like us who have been in China a great deal. I've been to China many, many times in the last few years, and seeing how China is really booming. There is a lot of LNG demand. There's a lot of LNG infrastructure being built. There is a declining indigenous gas production. A lot of the mini LNG plants that were built in the last 10 years are running out of gas. The transportation infrastructure is improving dramatically. Everybody wants cheap energy, clean energy, and LNG is definitely becoming the fuel of choice. We of course seen all the pictures of all the pollution in places like in Beijing, etc. When the government, I think, is now reacting to that by basically saying, yes, we need to get more gas. Gas is going to be the fuel that can provide us the energy that we need and at the prices that we can afford. And it's clean enough that the people are going to be happy about it. So what we have seen, of course, is that LNG demand in China has been much higher than people expected. And I think the consultants out there are now knocking over themselves, trying to exceed their last year's last year's demand forecast as much as they can. And I feel, like I have said for a number of times, that this low price environment that we had in 2017 has spurred a lot of demand in emerging countries, especially in China, but in other countries as well. And that is going to lead to a definite increase in the number of customers in the marketplace, customers who are demanding flexible volumes, who are demanding lower prices, more transparent prices, and who may or may not be capable or wanting to sign very long-term binding contracts that are very, very inflexible like we used to have in the old days. Now, of course, on the other side of the coin, we have places like Japan. Japan is actually just now a bit of a has-been story in the LNG business. Yes, of course, the demand is still high, but it is declining. And I think Japan's role in shaping the LNG prices, in shaping the LNG marketplace, in shaping how LNG is bought or sold, are definitely less important in the future than they were in the past. We have to look at places like China and potentially Southeast Asia, which are really going to be determining how LNG is bought and sold. We've seen this enormous growth in the LNG trading market, thanks to places like Singapore that have encouraged it. And really, yes, Japan benefited a little bit from that, but it wasn't the main beneficiary of that. There was really the emerging markets that took full advantage of the spot market in LNG. We have seen a constraint in Asia with infrastructure. The lack of infrastructure growth in places like Indonesia and India is definitely going to impact how fast LNG demand grows in those markets. I think we were over-optimistic in places like Indonesia that things are going to speed up and happen a lot faster than they would. I think Indonesia has been a bit of a disappointment. It remains to be seen how the state-owned entities, PGN, PLN, and Pertamina can work together and really figure out who's going to import LNG and how they're going to do it, and whether their domestic demand is enough. The domestic supply is enough. I think India is still going to be dominated by a couple of very large LNG importers. Very hard for private entities to break in. Much different than China, where private entities are going to be the future. Absolutely true in China that we have, out of the 16, I think, LNG terminals, 14 of them are owned by the large state-owned companies. But we're going to see the next wave of LNG terminals in China being developed by the private companies. And the reason the private companies are successful in places like China and more difficult in India is because the private companies, I think, are more capitalized in China. They are capable of building very large projects, and the bureaucracy is less coming in its way. In China, we see private companies who are now importing LNG, let's say at $10, $12 an MMBTU, and then trucking it to their own captive markets, industrial, commercial markets, and selling it for $20 an MMBTU. And thus they can bypass the whole local gas distribution system. They can bypass the monopoly that is by the older state-owned companies, and actually really break in the LNG into markets quite far away from the coast where the LNG terminals are. In India, the roads are more difficult, trucking is more difficult, state-owned enterprises are difficult, power stations are still very much owned by the state companies, and there's still a reluctance to really pay the price that LNG demands. That's why I think that LNG in India tends to still be dominated, bought by the big companies, while in China you'll see more private companies. Around the world, let's keep on going. I think the Middle East troubles is between Qatar and the rest of the Gulf were a bit of a surprise. We never expected that to happen the way it did. But I think it's getting actually more serious. It's in terms of I don't see any side backing down. There's going to be a defined push by the rest of the Gulf to not use Qatar LNG. I think they're going to be very reluctant to sign long-term deals with Qatar. There's always a concern that Qatar might turn off the Dolphin pipe to the UAE, even though they've said they won't, but you never know. And I think that any additional contracts by the UAE, by Saudi, even by Kuwait, are unlikely to involve any kind of Qatar supply. So where's the supply going to come from? I think that's a question we all ask. We have, if you keep on going around the world, we have places like Egypt, which are still growing in demand. There is, of course, the offshore gas finds, but it takes a long time for it to come to the point it's going to replace LNG. I'm still thinking Egypt is going to import LNG for another few years, quite 5 years at least, if not more. And then Europe has been quite a bit of a surprise. We always knew that European domestic gas production was going down, and that Russian gas was going to go up, especially with pipelines and LNG. Yamal's come online. It's a great surprise. It's been evidently a great success. But Europe is now very much looking at diversifying its supply. In the beginning of the year, I would have said it's very hard for other people's gas to compete in Europe. Today, I think that there's a lot of political win for the Europeans to diversify away from Russia. They know that Russia is not always a nice guy. We see that individual countries are now fighting back against Europe, the Russian gas expansion. Things like Denmark are blocking the Nord Stream Pipe 2 is an example of that. I think that apart from Germany, really every other country in Europe that is currently importing Russian gas is looking to also diversify its supplies. I think Germany just has too much invested in the infrastructure to change it right now. But I do think that European LNG imports are going to go up in the next few years because they don't really have much of a choice. Latin America is a very difficult market. The Brazil economic crisis has been worse and worse. It's not seeming like it's getting much better. Colombia and Chile and these countries are doing okay, but it's very hard to sell long-term LNG to these markets because of the hydro and the competition with hydro and geothermal and all these other kind of power sources. So, in the end of the day, I see that there's going to be a massive gas demand increase continuing in Asia, especially China and some of the emerging markets. I think Japan's going to be flat to declining. Korea, it's going to increase depending on how well the new government changes its position on coal and nuclear. I think that Middle East demand is going to grow as well, and it's not going to come from Qatar supply. And the European demand is going to grow. So the question is, where is the supply going to come from? As I've said many a time, I don't see any new supply from Australia. I do think that in 2018, we'll see a lot of the projects in Australia that have been under construction for the last few years come online. Ichthys will come online. Prelude, who knows? Prelude could be it could go either way. It could be a great success or it could be an unmitigated disaster. It's very hard to know. but it's not a huge amount of gas, 3.6 million tons. But Ichthys will come online sometime in 2018. So we'll still see incremental LNG coming from Australia. But what happens after Ichthys? I don't see any other new projects in Australia for a long, long time. And there's a massive political push in Australia to reduce the LNG that's being exported. If there is a really hot summer like we do expect, and gas prices do go up quite a bit because of electricity demand, then we could see shut-ins in some of the Queensland LNG plants. No one's talking about that today, but it is possible. There's a strong political will to help the people reduce their power bill, which are dramatically higher than they used to be. So we don't see any incremental demand from Australia, supply from Australia, other than the projects that are already in construction, which is Ichthys and Prelude. There are no real projects in the Southeast Asia except Tangguh, which is Tangguh expansion, which is really going for domestic Indonesia. There's nothing happening in the Middle East. The Qataris talk about debottlenecking. I'm very skeptical of that. Maybe they can get another 10 million tons, possibly, but are they going to get 25 million tons like they talk about? There's no way. And if they are going to get that, they need to do exploration. They need to give out exploration blocks. There need to be international companies coming in. There need to be land allocated. There need to be plants built. This is going to take 5 to 10 years. And with the current political environment, Qatar is kind of a pariah right now. So I don't see instantaneously they can snap their fingers and suddenly the production in Qatar is going to go up. So I don't see much happening from Qatar in the next few years. Maybe we'll see a progress of course, we'll see progress in coral in Mozambique. The other project, well, it's interesting now that Exxon's bought into it. Exxon's bought into the land project of Eni. I think it's very positive. I can see a project being built with Exxon, Anadarko, maybe down the road as well. So there is a little bit of movement in Mozambique, which I think is a long time coming. They spent billions of dollars. It's about time they do something. There'll be a few small FLNG ships in West Africa, Cameroon, maybe Equatorial Guinea, but really nothing that's going to move the needle. There's going to be nothing else in the Atlantic Basin. Mauritania is a long way away. Nothing happening in Europe apart from Yamal, which is going to continue building its expansions out. I think the next two. And then after that, I don't see any real project happening for a few years. And brings us to the US. So what we're going to see now in 2018 is a few more tons coming from Australia as the products get built out. And the last of the big first wave of projects in the US being completed. We're talking about Cove Point, which is due to come online any time. The rest of Sabine, Freeport, and Cameron. And we'll see and I think parts of Corpus. So the next 18 months, really the significant new supply is all coming from the US. And then what's going to happen? There's actually going to be a slowdown in new supply, while demand is going to keep on going up. And the slowdown, the next wave of new supply is going to hit the market in 2023. So between 2019 and 2023, there's going to be a flattened supply. At the same time, the demand is going to go up dramatically in China, and India is going to get its act together. Indonesia will build some infrastructure, Malaysia, and of course Europe is there. So for you buyers out there, you've had a pretty good run this year. I have a feeling that the good days are over. You're going to start seeing a situation in 2019 that there's going to be tough to get new supply. And in 2018, we'll see lots of new contracts being signed by the Chinese to buy LNG. So the buyers out there who think there's a lot of gas still available, I think they should be signing up the good LNG contracts soon. Because if they don't, either those projects are not going to continue staying alive, the new projects in the US especially, or we'll see the Chinese picking up the supply. So 2019 is going to be exciting. I think oil price is going to continue to rise. I think that they'll go over $65 for sure, average out for the year. We're going to see US gas continue to make a lot of inroads because there's no other choice of supply. US gas will get less and less going into Latin America in proportion-wise, more and more going to Asia and Europe. And I think that the Middle Eastern guys will also realize that they need to sign long-term deals with American suppliers. We'll see the European trading houses start figuring out diversification of supply as well. And I think that it'll be a lot of new exploration efforts around the world, which is what we need. We haven't had a lot of exploration drilling to really get the upstream side of things working while the downstream guys continue to build out the plants. So have a good new year. We'll see you in 2018, and I'm sure it'll be exciting. Thanks. Bye. Do leave some comments at the bottom of the screen because I'd love to read your comments. And of course, do check out my other websites as well, www.natgas.info and naturalgasdynamics.com. Thanks.